Senator Elizabeth Warren is out with a new book called Persist. And in it, among other things, she discusses why she thinks that her presidential campaign did not work out. So she starts by saying, look, there's a possibility, a very painful one, that in this moment against this president, in this field of candidates, maybe I just wasn't good enough to reassure the voters, to bring along the doubters, to embolden the hopeful. She points to her bungled handling of the Medicare for All taxation. We all remember that, which kind of undercut this idea that she had a plan for everything. And just, I mean, in my view, she doesn't say this part. It just made her feel like a sort of typical politician trying to parse her words and not just directly tell people what she was going to do and how she was going to do it. She seemed to run away from the initial Medicare for All positioning even and kind of soft pedal where she actually ended up. But she also, without directly saying that sexism is the reason she lost, seems to very strongly suggest it. I'm reading now from the New York Times report on the book. They say, frank discussion of her gender and the obstacles it poses runs throughout the 304-page book. She never attributes sexism directly for her loss, but she provides plenty of evidence that it remained a serious factor in the race. Stories of discrimination against women run throughout her book as she recounts the struggles of her own career trajectory and offers prescriptions for changes. Again and again, Ms. Warren suggests Democratic voters were wary of nominating a second woman, fearing another defeat to Donald Trump. She, quote, had to run against the shadows of Martha and Hillary, she writes, a reference to Martha Coakley, who lost to Scott Brown, and then Hillary Clinton, of course. So again, she doesn't come out and say it, but she strongly suggests Democratic primary voters were too sexist to vote for her.
Yeah, I actually think it's more of an insult to women that the only two people, or that she is comparing herself to Hillary, or possibly the phoniest person alive, man or woman. And then also you have somebody here who, yeah, I'm amazed she was just like Hillary because she was incredible. She was phony. I mean, that's really what people saw in her, which is that at the end of the day, there were two people in the Democratic primary who were truly in contention. It was Sanders and Biden. Both had legitimate constituencies. Everybody else was either trying to cobble together some amalgamation of the two, half Biden, half Bernie, people's number two choice, etc. And her thing is that the bottom fell out for her with Medicare for All because many of the Bernie people who were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt were like, oh, you're full of it. Like, you don't actually believe it. And then many of the Biden people were like, look, I've already got Biden. Like, why do I need you? And so she had no real constituency outside of extremely upper middle class white people, which it turns out, yes, there are some of them in Iowa, although not enough in order to deliver for her. There are some of them in New Hampshire, although not enough to deliver for her. And they especially don't exist in South Carolina, Nevada, many of these other places. So her campaign was largely doomed, not just from a policy perspective, but from the fact that she could not authentically speak to the real concerns of a lot of voters. And look, I think she's a smart lady. I always have. I read her book. She's probably one of the more intellectual members of the U.S. Senate. But as a politician, she was a disaster. It's very disingenuous for her to deploy sexism again, especially after that whole fake thing where Bernie told me I couldn't win, as a woman. It's ludicrous, again. Yeah. And she continually alludes to the idea that she was rejected because of her gender. There's just no evidence to support that whatsoever.
Well, and I would say on the flip side of it, I mean, look, as a woman who has run for office, there are definitely ways that you're judged differently from male candidates. But when Hillary lost for manifest reasons, like being on the wrong side of issues that people cared about, whether it was trade or whether it was, her history with Iraq, failing to campaign or resonate in places that were key, like Michigan and Wisconsin, there was a narrative afterwards that she lost because of sexism. Yeah. And so I actually do think that some Democratic primary voters internalize that messaging of country's too sexist, so we gotta go because Trump is the new Hitler and we gotta stop fascism coming to America. We got to throw out this idea of, it would be great to have a woman in office, and we just got to vote for whoever the media tells us is electable. And so when Joe Biden was that person of this is the one who's electable, they went with it. So in a way, the narrative about Hillary Clinton losing because of sexism, I think it did hurt candidates like Elizabeth Warren. Now, on the other hand, I think the much larger problems in her campaign are the ones that you specified. Look, Biden and Bernie are already extraordinarily well known. You know what they stand for. They were the two polar opposites of the spectrum in terms of how they ran their campaigns. And so they had a natural constituency. And from the beginning, and we really were the only ones that covered it this way, it really was a battle between the two of them.
It was
from the
so
beginning.
obvious.
There were candidates, the media would pump up Kamala, they'd pump up Beto, they'd pump up Pete, they'd pump up Amy, they'd pump up Elizabeth Warren. But none of it ever actually gained real momentum and real traction. Warren seemed like she might have a shot at it, but when she mishandled her stance on Medicare for all and came off just looking like any old other typical politician, that was really kind of it for her. And then the nail in the coffin was when she came after Bernie and said that he was sexist and had suggested that a woman can't win. That was really the end of her campaign as a going concern.
It's because most people, especially Democratic voters, he had one of the highest favorability rates.
Yeah, even people who didn't vote for him
people were just like, I don't believe you. Yeah, I mean, and that really was. And I don't believe it either. I don't believe it for 1 second. And I don't think any of you should, based upon her long track record around this entire issue. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. It's awful convenient to bring up the misunderstanding 2 years later.
Well, here's the other thing. It's very illustrative about how her campaign came to be about nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a person who had a real track record, deep experience coming into politics not because she wanted her own self-aggrandizement, but because she cared about these issues of like families and bankruptcy and the middle class and people being able to support themselves and support a family, going after Joe Biden for his carrying water for the credit card companies. And then when you're actually running for president, your critique is about something Bernie said that you found off-putting in a private conversation versus what Joe Biden has actually done over decades within his career, something she said nothing about during her campaign.
I remember doing, I think it was a monologue here, the day after she launched a $10 million ad buy on corruption in Washington. She was asked about Hunter Biden and Ukraine, and she didn't have one word to say.
She really stumbled on that.
All right, this is all fake.
Well, and here's the thing that's, sad, I guess, depending on how you look at it, is clearly she's doing that because she thought Biden had a good shot at winning. Right. She wanted to be the VP or she wanted to be Treasury Secretary. Where are you now? Writing a book that no one's going to read. Yeah. Wildly irrelevant to all of these conversations that are unfolding right now on issues that she has cared about in the past. Things like childcare, things like universal pre-K, these massive packages that are being debated right now. Her voice is basically absent. She's become wholly irrelevant. Now that I've seen articles of like, oh, she's got a direct line to Biden. She's talking to him behind the scenes. Okay. Yeah. Congratulations. That's what you got for stabbing Bernie in the back and making sure a progressive couldn't win. Great job.
There you go.
More rising for you after this.